Even after governments provided billions to pharma corporations to create COVID-19 vaccines, because of World Trade Organization rules, where and how much vaccine is produced around the world is determined solely by the pharmaceutical firms. Today, 100 nations led by India and South Africa are proposing a temporary emergency waiver of these WTO rules, the TRIP rules. If these waivers go through, governments and manufacturers worldwide would be able to ramp up production of the vaccines and other treatments necessary to end this global pandemic. Here to discuss this issue and the role America plays, Lori Wallach. Lori is the director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch, a 25-year veteran of congressional trade battles, starting with the 1990s fight over NAFTA. She was also named to Politico's 50 list of thinkers, doers, and visionaries transforming American politics for her leadership in the Trans-Pacific Partnership debate. Lori, we thank you forever for that. That seems to have worked out. Thanks. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Lori, can we start with, could you please explain the TRIPS waiver and what is the situation they are aimed at correcting?
So the World Trade Organization is called a trade agreement, but it includes rules that shouldn't be in any trade agreement, including protectionist monopolies for big pharmaceutical corporations. The WTO's TRIPS agreement, the trade-related aspects of intellectual property, requires all 158 signatory countries to the WTO to guarantee that the pharmaceutical corporations have long monopoly control over the information, technology, formulas related to making medicines. And so South Africa and India, with 100 other countries behind them, are saying, hey, in the middle of this global pandemic, let's waive those monopoly protections to make sure that every place all over the world we can have the most vaccines, treatments, and testing, diagnostic testing for COVID being produced, so that particularly given governments have invested literally tens of billions in creating the vaccines, the companies didn't put their money up, they had no risk, then that information should be shared so we can try and beat COVID. Because, Julianna, here's the reality. If there are outbreaks any place in the world, then there will be mutations. And eventually there will be a variant that will get around the vaccines we've had. So the US, the EU can be 100% vaccinated in 2021. And at the rate we're on, most of the world will not be vaccinated for 4 years.
Lori, why don't the pharmaceutical industries, who would obviously profit financially from ramping up production and spreading it far and wide to every corner of the globe, why would they not want to do that? Why are they holding back?
So their business model is to basically get profits from the parts of the world and the customers that can pay a sizable amount for the vaccines. So their focus isn't on getting it everywhere. Their focus is on maximizing the profits. So they know that for the least developing countries who are not supposed to get any vaccines under this current model until 2024, they know that they will not be getting a lot of money out of those sales. So they just are happy to let those people die. I mean, I'm being crass, but the reality is that if there is a 4-year lag in the whole world getting vaccinated, the vaccines that we may get this year will probably not be effective against whatever is the dominant variant that will be going around with the mutations at that point. Well, so as well as being a moral issue, it's in our interest.
Well, it's not in the pharmaceutical company's interest, though, Lori, because once the next variant comes to town, they can create a new vaccine that everyone in America has to get and everyone in the rich developed countries has to get. How can we make this hurt them financially so that they'll be willing to do it?
Well, the bottom line is the decision about whether or not those rules that the WTO are going to apply is 100% on governments. So frankly, screw the pharmaceutical companies. This is a global economic and health emergency for people around the world. All the governments need to step up and actually do this waiver. It's the first key step to getting more production worldwide. I mean, here's the math. Right now, if every existing facility that is able to make these vaccines is cranking, 3.5 billion doses can be made in 2021. We need between 10 and 15 billion doses to be made to cover everybody. So the practical reality is, all around the world, in some places 3 months, in some places 6 months, new facilities could be producing new supply of vaccine if the formulas, the know-how, the technology is shared. And the first step, therefore, is waiving the monopoly controls of the pharmaceutical firms, and it's 100% in the control of the governments. The pharmaceutical firms do not have a say in this.
What has President Biden's administration's response been?
Well, this is the frustrating situation. Not shockingly, the Trump administration led the very small group of WTO members blocking. Handful of countries, but the WTO works by consensus. So the Trump administration could just block this waiver. Since the Biden administration has come in, there have been 2 meetings to date, and the US position hasn't shifted. But here's the thing to consider. It's not necessarily that the Biden administration is against the waiver. It is the case that they inherited an entire football field of flaming dumpster fires. And some of them were explosive and radioactive, as this one is. So we just need to get this dumpster pushed forward so they realize they have to think about it. And then we have to make sure they make the right decision and get on the right side of history. Because, the US was the bloc in the 90s at the same exact situation at the WTO for HIV/AIDS medications. In the US by then, people who had antiretrovirals had a lifetime disease that they could control and live with. People in Africa were dying from AIDS. And we in the US, the United States government, blocked for years the same kind of a waiver, also pushed by South Africa. Ultimately, in 2001, the US backed down and agreed, but millions of people died. So this time—
Do you think there was a racial element to that?
One would hope under the Clinton administration that wouldn't be the case, but I think it was just Pharma greed. There are our companies, and it not being a problem that was at home. This is a situation where this is a problem that's at home. If you want to be the greediest, most short-sighted, if people in Latin America and Africa and the Caribbean and Asia don't get this vaccine, and as a result, there are major COVID outbreaks, there will be mutations. There will be new variants. They will be more infectious. They will be more fatal, and they will get around the vaccines we've had. So none of us can be safe until everyone is vaccinated. And if you want to get really crass, it's also an economic crisis. The International Chamber of Commerce said if the current scenario of developing countries not getting vaccines until 2024 actually plays out, the global economy will lose around $9 trillion a year, with half of it lost per year in the rich countries. So the only way out, health-wise and economically, is for all around the world, the production of vaccines, treatments, and diagnostic tests to be increased. And the critical first step is to get the information, the technology to be able to do that. Around the world, there are facilities. The problem is they don't have the formulas. They don't have the know-how to start manufacturing.
If President Biden's administration changes course, which I'd also like to know your thoughts on, does it seem at all like he might do this? And then if he does, the other countries who are blocking, do you believe they would follow the United States' precedent?
I think that there is growing pressure worldwide. In the European Union, the European Parliament, hundreds of parliamentarians sent a letter to the trade officials there saying, you've got to knock it off. I think if the US actually reversed course very quickly, there would be a waiver. And the reason why is a lot of the other countries are hiding behind the US. Europe came up after the US, but otherwise it's just literally Switzerland, Australia, Japan, Norway, and Singapore, with Canada playing a pretty bad role, but not quite as bad. That's it. So if the US isn't there basically providing it's okay to be on the side of history, I think the good housekeeping seal of approval goes, all the other countries cave too. And then it's the necessary step to try and start getting this production going. We're in a race against time. So if we know it's going to take 3 to 6 months to actually, once the technology is transferred, to get going, we don't need time to spare. So this very week, the WTO committee is meeting again. And this is the next opportunity for the US to stop blocking. Right now, the US is blocking even talking about what the text of the waiver should be. They're basically just saying, ixnay, we'll have no discussion of this. So this very week in Geneva, that decision is being made again about whether or not they will actually get down to brass tacks about this. And there's a lot of pressure in the US Congress, and there's a lot of pressure growing around the world for governments to basically get out of the way for saving us all.
In the US, is this a bipartisan issue, or is it one party has is in the right place and the other party is pressuring against?
There are some Republicans who are in the right place, but largely the Republican Party is much closer to pharma than the Democrats. There's certainly some Democrats who are too close to pharma. But as a general,
sorry, Cory Booker, right? Anyway.
But as a general matter, it is the case that, I mean, hell, Cory Booker was in the newspaper The Hill with the president of Public Citizen, my boss, basically saying there needs to be some way to get sharing of this information worldwide to increase production.
Wow.
So it's at a level where in the Democratic Party, there are very few members of Congress who don't think this is a good idea.
Even Cory Booker feels it's a good idea. And I point him out because I live in the greater New York area. So he's kind of one of ours, and his state has a lot of pharmaceutical companies in it, New Jersey.
Well, here's the thing. He's in New Jersey. New Jersey is one of the places, as is Massachusetts, as is California, where the so-called life sciences, the pharmaceutical industry, has a lot of clout because they have a lot of corporations incorporated there. But here's the bottom line with all of that. They didn't put up their own money for these vaccines. We, the US taxpayer, paid for the development, we paid for the testing, and we pre-ordered, our tax dollars pre-ordered literally billions of dollars. So these companies can't even make their usual argument, which is never true. But in this instance, they can't say we need to charge more, we need to control, we need to limit the supply and keep the price up, because that's how we'll fund our future research, and that's how we'll pay ourselves back for this research. They have this all paid up front. They are just pure profit right now, and they're making tens of billions under the current scenario. If they could continue to make the money from the rich countries and still share the technology so the poor countries could also get on board, they simply haven't a leg to stand on. I'll tell you what I think is going on. They don't want the precedent, even in the face of the biggest global health crisis in a generation. They don't want the precedent of people's lives taking precedent over their monopoly patent rights.
Wow.
That's the bottom line. And they don't want this as a model. And so they're just saying, no, no, no.
Wow. That's amazing. And when you say they don't want it, you mean the
pharmaceutical corporations. So yesterday, 30 pharmaceutical CEOs sent a letter to President Biden saying, under no circumstances should you do this TRIPS waiver. And the letter and their arguments are pretty racist. I mean, they say things like people in developing countries couldn't possibly make these extremely sophisticated vaccines, which of course is ridiculous.
Don't you let them try?
Well, skip the let them try. The reality is the corporations are doing contract manufacturing in the developing countries. So for instance, there are big generic companies in India, in South Africa. And the problem is the pharmaceutical corporations say, you, Serum Institute in India, you may make 1 million doses a week and you must sell 91% to these 3 European countries, and you can keep 9% for sale in India. But you can't make more, and you can't send more to any other developing country, and you can't have more for home. And so they have the monopoly control where they can do that. The trick is to have... What happens
if that factory just says, you know what, go jump in a lake. You already gave us the patent. You already gave us the information. We're kicking you out, and we're just going to make these million for our... What if India nationalizes that company?
Well, you're the guru of health in this with that thought, because basically, if this TRIPS waiver happened, what would practically that would mean is the Serum Institute could have a separate line going that is for themselves to sell or distribute as they wanted. They could just be making them for the United Nations to send out in COVAX, which is a program to give vaccines to the poorest countries, which doesn't have enough supply. They could just be making a second line where, okay, here's our contract with you. We'll deliver to you, big corporation. But here's another line. Now that we, the Serum Institute, have the rights to this like everyone else in the world, we're going to make some that we're given to the UN. They could do that then. That's exactly what they could do. There was a fascinating AP story last week where a guy who runs a company in Bangladesh that makes similar things said, here I am. I actually have a high-tech factory with all the equipment. I could be making vaccines in vials and shipping them with FDA level approval in 3 months. If you can just give me the information so I can start making test samples, make sure it works, and get it out the door. So it's around the world, the capacity. What is the block is the handcuffs of this WTO mandate that every country has to let pharma control tightly this net. It's like a steel mesh around all the technology. And a lot of the corporations say, well, the WTO has flexibilities. You can just use the flexibilities. The flexibilities required to negotiate for every patent, every copyright, every piece of inside information, country by country, medicine by medicine. So when you have a global pandemic, you don't have time for every company to negotiate with every country over every piece of intellectual property. You just have to put it in the commons and let that plant in Bangladesh and let the ones that could do it in Colombia and Chile and Argentina and Thailand and South Africa start making this stuff and getting it into people's arms.
If the pharmaceutical industries didn't want the precedent, wouldn't it behoove them to just say, okay, we're going to say that just this one time we could do it? But they still won't do that even.
They have fought so hard to stick these outrageous monopoly protectionist measures and trade agreements that to some degree, they don't want the focus. They don't want the spotlight. They don't want people saying, wait a minute, a free trade agreement has monopolist rent-seeking protections for one industry? Isn't that the opposite of free trade? They don't want the spotlight focusing on the outrageousness, the disgustingness of them having larded up a trade agreement with basically anti-competitive corporate protectionism. So they just want, basically, their goal is to blame something else. So the countries don't have the sophistication. There isn't enough manufacturing capacity. That's the problem. The people in developing countries won't take the shots. It's like the classic squirrel. Look someplace else.
Sure.
And that is, but here's, everyone who's listening to this is what we need to do. This is in the control of the Biden administration now. They need to step up and change the position. If they do, in short order, this is going to be resolved. And the way to get that done is right now, every member of the House of Representatives is being asked to sign a letter to the president. That letter is being led by some of the most senior members of Congress, Jan Schakowsky, who's the chairwoman of the Consumer Subcommittee, Rosa DeLauro, she's the chair of the Full Appropriations Committee, Congressman Earl Blumenauer, the chair of the Trade Committee, and they're getting all their colleagues in a letter that basically says, hey, some of us support pharma companies, some of us are critics of pharma companies. In this global emergency, for an emergency temporary waiver, we cannot dawdle. This must happen now. The administration must change its position. We must join the world, waive the WTO monopolies for big pharma, and get COVID-19 vaccinations, treatments, and tests being produced worldwide.
Lori Wallach, is there on tradewatch.org, the website for Public Citizens Global Trade Watch, the organization where you are the director, is there anything you can sign? Is there a petition? What can we do there?
So number one, there you can get all this information. If what I've been talking about seems overwhelming, there is the 1-page fact sheet, there's the 4-page, here's what they say, here's the reality. So there's a whole special feature right when you go to tradewatch.org, right there. First thing, click on that, it has all the information. But 2 things you can do there. One, you can immediately sign a petition on which there are already tens of thousands of Americans to the president. And number 2, there's information about how to get in touch with our field director and his staff so that you can actually get hooked up and know where your member of Congress is. Because really right now it's getting the House and Senate members to weigh in and actually tell the president, we are with the public. We are with the 100 countries at the WTO. We want the United States to join the world against pharma in getting out these vaccines, because that's what's at stake. The Biden administration has to decide to reverse the horrible Trump position at the WTO and allow the information to go worldwide to make the COVID vaccines, treatments, and tests. And that is a decision solely that we as the public pressuring the White House directly and we getting our members of Congress to pressure the White House can actually make the difference. That is something people in the US can make the difference on.
Such an important issue. The website where you can go is tradewatch.org. Again, tradewatch.org. Lori Wallach, Director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch. Thank you for being here with us today and for shedding the light on this very important issue on the mainstream media, of which I have heard a big fat zero.
Zero. Thank you for bringing it up. It has been locked out, and you are doing a real public service.
Thank you so much. We'll see you next time. You're watching Act TV. I'm Julianna Forlano. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Bye, Lori. I just exited her from the screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and go to tradewatch.org and sign that petition and do all that stuff she just said. You can get hooked up with your own member of Congress and make sure they know exactly how you feel. And it does matter. I know people who work in these congressional offices. It really, they do listen. I believe they have some sort of algorithm where they think if one person actually gets off their butt and calls us, that means 100 people are actually caring about this issue. So don't forget, again, tradewatch.org, or you can follow Lori at Wallach Lori on Twitter. I'm Julianna Forlano, also followable on Twitter under Julianna Forlano. And I'm here every week on Act TV.